There we are. Sweet. Okay. So during the section on ecotherapy, we were talking about nature in general and the ocean in general. And so now, why surfing? Surfing is a high intensity sport, which causes the brain to release positive endorphins and stress hormones. And so this endorphin and stress hormone release, plus the health benefits of ocean water, is a really powerful combination. Um, and also surfing, to just be able to name it and acknowledge it, surfing isn't always accessible, especially when we're talking about chronic pain. And so how we define surfing is a much broader understanding of surfing. Surfing isn't just the standing up on the wave and getting barreled and performance based. It's also this tool for interacting and accessing the ocean. And so we honor surfing as literally like being able to lie and float on the surfboard, to being able to just get in the water and feel your body interacting with the waves. And so some of the things that surfing provides that is unique to other ways of engaging with nature is this element of falling and failing. Falling, failing is part of life, and surfing normalizes failure and fears as part of life. Because it's essential. If you're going to surf, you will fall. If you're going to surf, you will experience fear. And so it gives your body this opportunity to experience it and normalize it and work with it and build that resiliency around it. And so we see every little wave as almost like this little mini trauma experience that's coming towards you. But rather than a usual trauma experience, you get to reclaim your power, control, and choice by choosing what you want to do with that wave. Whether you want to dive under it, turtle it, get pummeled by it, or turn around and surf it. And so I love that Michelle brought in that video of that wave coming in and those people literally having to like get through that wave coming at them. And after that wave passed, what was after it? There's moments of stillness, a pause before another wave came. And those pauses are essential in also helping us to process and build our neurological brain towards resiliency. And so each wave is only for that one little moment. The wave will pass, giving you an opportunity to soak in what happened and decide what you want to do differently for the next wave. And the physical act of wiping out allows your body to literally shake out and off those stuck stress hormones that allow your body to practice and to practice the healthy ebb and flow of stress, build and release in the body. And so, as I mentioned earlier, surfing is a high intensity sport, which causes the brain to release those endorphins and stress hormones. Not all in the world that we live in today, stress has this like bad rap of being something that we don't want, but actual like stress hormonal release is actually really important and a part of our healthy ebb and flow and part of our body process. And to be able to learn how to experience stress and then let it flow out of you. Animals naturally shake after having a stressful experience to help get those hormones out. Whereas as humans, we've been told shaking isn't something that we are supposed to do. But in surfing, after a stressful experience, a wipeout happens, your body is pummeled through the waves and you are literally shaking out those hormones. And so we have falling and failing. We have connection to nature, which we touched on earlier, which brings in that essence of presence and flow. So just thinking about the ocean like we did a moment ago can connect you to your senses and bring you into that present moment. Trauma triggers are consistently bringing you into the past, that old trauma experience, trying to keep you safe to make sure it doesn't happen to you again. And nature, especially the activation of the ocean, brings you into the present moment. So if you are disassociating or checking out and going into that trauma trigger, the ocean will bring you right back. That wave will come and knock you over, smack you up, smack you over, and bring you back into that present moment where you have to think about what's happening right here and right now. You can't go into the past because that wave's going to get you. You have to be in the present moment. So that way you can move with the waves, learn from the waves, go underneath the waves, or surf those waves. And then that sense of flow, bringing fully present, fully alive, fully here. And then we have systems change and being witnessed. And so from what it means to do therapy to who belongs, both therapy and surfing have deep roots in oppression. I really appreciate that Tracy brought in that piece that a lot of people don't want, or maybe it was Michelle, don't want to actually reach out to doctors or therapists for the support they need because there's been oppression, there's been trauma. There's been wounding there in the history and culture of the medical system. And so surf therapy gives us opportunity to break down those barriers and those systems of oppression by creating an intentional and welcoming space for those who have historically been oppressed or excluded, both in the surfing world and in the therapy world or the medical world, to reclaim themselves in this space. And it's also this remembering of how cultures and peoples and communities have been doing healing for generations and generations and generations before the word therapy even existed. And so birth, death, healing all used to be done within the community space, within nature. In today's medical system, especially during the pandemic, isolated people in their biggest experiences of birthing, dying, and healing. And so coming back to doing healing within community, within nature, allows us to be seen and witnessed when we're going through those biggest moments of our life. And it helps normalize the healing journey and allows us to no longer be stigmatized and alone, but connected, seen, heard, and honored. And then also some of the fun things that have been coming in that we're doing research around is this bilateral movements and embodiments of resilience. And so as I talk through these, I'm going to invite everyone to do a little power stance. So maybe feeling your feet on the floor, bring your arms out, feeling the strength come up through your feet, up through your knees, your back, your gut, your core, out your shoulders, into your hands, maybe even your face, just bringing in that power, that strength, that resilience within you. And so the first piece is EMDR. So EMDR is a common trauma therapy now, and it's all about bilateral movements and bilateral stimulation within the brain. And as we're paddling, we are doing these bilateral movements. One side, left side, right side, stimulating both sides of the brain. And it's a great time to bring in new mantras, new ways of being. And so one of the practices what we have people do is as they're paddling is what is an old mantra and how do they want to change it? What would be that new mantra to be bringing in? I belong, I can do it, I do have a voice, I am strong. Whatever that thing is that they want to be bringing in, saying that as they're paddling to help it integrate into their brain. And then there's currently Pain Trauma Institute and Groundswell are doing research with USC focusing on pelvic floor or chronic pelvic floor pain and how surfing and the little minute movements that are happening as you are sitting on your surfboard looking out into the horizon is huge in supporting and healing pelvic floor pain. And then consistency of looking towards the horizon for what is to come supports macro vision and thinking rather than the micro vision and thinking that often happens when we have our patterns of anxiety. And this power stance is similar to the stance that we're doing as we're going out into the ocean, so that way waves don't pummel us over, or when we're standing on our surfboard. And this power stance, there are studies showing that holding it for 3 minutes, which I'm like, ooh, we almost did it for 3 minutes just now, allows your brain and your body to recognize like, ooh, I am powerful, I am in control, and I am resilient. And so simply doing this power stance, as people have been told to like do it before you go into an interview or before you go into a hard conversation, to really like feel the power and the strength within you. And that's what we're doing when we're surfing. We're standing on a wave, we're in our power stance, we're taking up space and reclaiming our power, our control, our trust, our intimacy. And so, research has been happening from different spaces with the International Surf Therapy Organization. Different journals have been publishing research on surf therapy, which is really exciting because this is that next stage of bringing surf therapy fully into the clinical space. And we've been working with Dr. Mills, the professor of family medicine and public health and director of the Center of Excellence for Research and Training in Integrative Health at UCSD. And they're in the process of publishing a paper that focuses on how groundswell surf therapy programs help improve body acceptance, resilience, and emotional regulation for at-risk women. So if you can change the slide. One more time. Yeah. And so resilience, we've touched on resilience already, and bringing like what makes for me for surf therapy and groundswell surf therapy model, resilience is one of the key pieces that going into the ocean, building that relationship to self within community and with nature, with the ocean, allows us to really build and deepen our resiliency. And that's our ability to respond and react and overcome. And so the first piece, Dr. Ariella Shorts has a beautiful kind of breakdown of what it takes to grow resiliency. And these are the things that are incorporated into our surf therapy model. And so the first one is growth mindset. And so shifting from like an example, children being praised for their efforts to children being praised for who they actually are. And so this is as surf coaches, as teachers, as healers, and as friends, praising yourself and each other for the effort you put into showing up to accomplish the task versus compliments like you're natural at this. You're such a great surfer. But we're like, wow, you're really working hard. I can see how hard you're working on that. I can see like the shift and the change that you're creating within yourself. So, and normalizing falling and failing is part of that process, and celebrating our falls as well as our successes. And that's something that surf therapy does really powerfully. So that growth mindset. The number two is an emotional intelligence. So that's bringing in journaling, writing, talking through significant events, and feeling safe to share authentically and vulnerably. And that's where group work is so important, being able to be seen, heard, and honored within that community. And that brings us into the third piece, community. Staying connected and involved rather than isolating. I touched on that earlier. Oftentimes trauma isolates us. And oftentimes the trauma experiences happen within relationship, happen within community. So to be able to come back into community and find safety and find vulnerability and intimacy is a huge element in reclaiming that and building that up again. And then self-expression and creativity. So that's my art therapy foundation. The art transports you to the realm of the soul. It's an invitation to be in the unknown. And we know less about the ocean than we do about our brains. And so being able to we're literally, when we go into the ocean, we are going into the unknown, and giving us that opportunity to feel held and supported in the unknown and explore it, and to have that experience of like, we don't have control over everything. And when we don't have control, what can we do? And so being able to express and create puts us in that space of being held within the unknown and within the spiritual. And then embodiments. And so exercise, helps with metabolizing stress, play, finding something you enjoy and doing it with your body. And so surfing, ocean play, being able to do that with community. And in Body Keeps the Score, there's this quote that I love. It says, body pleasure and mastery heals trauma. And I love that because it brings it back to the joy and the importance and essentialness of joy in trauma healing. And then choice and control, belief that your decisions and actions make an impact. This is accomplished through setting goals that are achievable, like showing up, honoring people's no as a no, and I choose statements. And so choice and control, choosing what wave you want to go for and what wave you don't want to go for. So I have a couple quotes just from some participants. So one quote is, I was actually go through those quotes. Let's see, what's the next slide? So I've been in trauma therapy for 6 years. And in the 8 weeks of groundswell surf therapy programs, I experienced an effectiveness and quickness in healing that even my therapist noticed. It's brilliant combining all these elements: surf, ocean, therapy, community, mindfulness. While one is busy having fun, Mother Ocean is sucking stress out of you. And the facilitators are right there holding space and so much love and kindness for all of us. Groundswell and Mother Ocean are quite a team. Next one. I surf today and am so unbelievably grateful. It seemed almost unreal to let go of so many fears and childhood trauma in such a nurturing environment has truly changed my life. In saying yes to surfing, I said yes to my healing and yes to myself. And I love this quote because it's so easy to be like, it's just surfing. What does this have to do about childhood trauma and all these different things? And when a sport like surfing can be held within that trauma-informed mindset and as an art modality for expression and connection and building a relationship to self, each other, and this earth, it is trauma therapy. and old things can come up. We have a number of women that after their first couple of sessions, they'll start sharing, like, I'm having dreams about things, different memories are coming to the surface because the trauma is stored in the body, and the ocean invites us to move our bodies and access our bodies and feel our bodies in ways that maybe we've numbed out or cut out to be able to keep ourselves safe. And the ocean starts opening that back up. And as trauma healers and trauma supporters and therapists, we get a chance to help see them and hear them and honor them exactly where they're at and what's coming up in those spaces, and allowing the ocean and yourself to be co-facilitators in that space together. And bringing it back specifically to chronic pain, this is a quote from one of our surf sisters, a little bit more of her background. She was sexually molested by a family member from the age of 9 to 14, and then was gang raped at the age of 16 while traveling in South America. And she explains that it's a horrific story, but one that's unfortunately all too common among a lot of the women that participate in Groundswell Community Projects programs. But since she started surfing and participating in the program, she explains that how, like, she experienced this huge shift in her body and mind, and now mind body. She speaks of being healed of depression, high blood pressure, and insomnia, and surfing bringing an overall sense of well-being back into her life. And so this is what, like, Dr. Michelle was speaking into, how sleep is such a huge piece of well-being, and surfing, being able to show up into these community surf spaces where intention, mindfulness, somatics, body engagement, body reconnection was happening, allowed, it wasn't just, oh, I'm feeling joy and I'm feeling less depressed, but my blood pressure is improving. My insomnia is improving. And so physical, tangible changes are happening to the body as we access our body more and learn how to listen to our body and recognize that our body has wisdom to teach us. Next slide. This is a clip from the Today Show, and this is actually how Tracy and I originally connected. I'm aware of the time though, and so maybe we can just share it in the Mighty Networks for people to be able to access and watch on their own. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm wishing I could go surfing right now. In some warm water, that would be even better though.
I thought California had warm water.
Probably warmer than what you've got, but it's been down in the 50s.
That's what I mean. Oh, that's warm.
That's warm. What is your water?
I think we're upper 40s now. It might be low 50s by now. It gets a lot warmer with a south wind though.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm a chicken. I'm a fair weather surfer, I guess. All right. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go back into the other part of ecotherapy that we're talking about today, which is our relationship with the earth through food and plants. And so the concept of food as medicine, or that food is medicine, is an important piece of healing. I'm thinking of a patient with early stage breast cancer who she told me that she didn't grocery shop, she doesn't really cook, and she really has no mindfulness about food as a form of nourishment. So this can be another means of how people get disconnected from their body through trauma. And she wasn't even aware of her trauma until she was talking about her sleep, saying she didn't sleep well. And I said, well, what was your sleep like as a child? And her facial expression just really said it all. As you could see, she was making a connection, and she said, I had an older sister who was physically incapacitated. She had been born that way. And she said, as a child, I slept outside of her room on a couch every night because I was afraid there would be a fire and she wouldn't be able to get out. So one thing I love about being a naturopathic doctor is having the time to talk to patients and dig into these underlying health things. But she was able to make this connection between her past trauma. Her mother was traumatized during her pregnancy because she had already had a child born with a disability. And now here's this woman today with breast cancer and never having any idea of that impact on her health. So in addition to these macronutrients that we need to live and grow, there are proteins, carbohydrates, fats. There are other forms of nutrients. And so when I was a midwife and studied to be an herbalist, my burning question was, what makes a plant a medicine? I hadn't studied chemistry. I didn't know anything about it. I went back to school, and I'm sort of a chemistry nerd, and you'll see that in this slideshow. So don't feel like you have to understand the chemistry. But plants adapt readily and more quickly to the environment than we do. They have to produce seed for that year, or flower, or whatever their life cycle is. And so they're making things that we need, like I said, the macronutrients, and micronutrients like minerals can be brought to us from the soil through the plant. But the plants are also making these compounds called secondary plant metabolites, and the plant doesn't need these to grow. And in fact, stress is what induces the plant to produce these metabolites. So the forms of stress being light, heat, too much heat, not enough water, insects. These are all stressors on plants, and the plant reacts by making these secondary plant metabolites. So this biotic stress expresses their gene expression quite rapidly. So as a result of this gene expression, they make terpenes. These are the molecules we can smell in plants that fly out into the air when we walk past or walk under a eucalyptus tree. We can smell it. The cannabinoid compounds are some of these. We have a huge class called phenolics and flavonoids, and there's many others, and we won't go into all of them, but these are beyond nutrients, beyond vitamins. And so this is a form of hormesis in the plant, that there is stress upon the plant reacts by producing these compounds. Now, too much stress, too much heat, too much lack of water, that's going to kill the plant. So too much is toxic, but just the right amount of environmental stress leads the plant to provide us these compounds that are our medicines. So Paracelsus, who has been called the father of chemistry, he lived in the 1500s. He was also considered the father of toxicology. He said, solely the dose determines that a thing is not a poison. So an example of this is mercury. Let's say mercury. We know that mercury can be very toxic and kill nerve cells at a high dose. But at really, really low doses, mercury has actually been used as a medicine. There's another concept of like curing like. And so this is an example of what's called the doctrine of signatures, or the language of plants. So here's a picture of a fungus or a mushroom growing, and it looks very much like a brain. And we're going to talk more about mushrooms in the brain. This is a plant from a family called Saxifragiaceae, and that literally means breaking rocks. And so this plant has been used to break up kidney stones and gallbladder stones. This is horsetail. Horsetail grows at the boundary of water and land. And so it was thought that it would treat the kidneys, and we find out it does. It can flush minerals out of the body, and something that can harm our body called uric acid. This is called liverwort. It was called liverwort because it looked like the liver. And we know now that there are flavonoids that are medicinal for the liver. And this is shepherd's purse. And you can see this little seed pocket that looks like a heart. And so shepherd's purse was used to stop bleeding. And now we know that it has some chemical properties that increase clotting, and it has astringent effects that close down and help shut off bleeding. So these phytochemicals can help us in our adaptive stress response. And they do this by biological effects of hitting specific chemical pathways that help protect us from adversity. So this is this concept of hormesis and homeostasis. I just wanted to review again. And so here's dose. As we go along this line, we're getting to higher dose. This is low dose. And this is the response of the human to something. And let's, as an example, vitamin D. If we don't get enough vitamin D, we're down here in deficiency, and there will be a set of symptoms associated with vitamin D deficiency. And then there's a range of vitamin D in our body where we want to be, and that would be our homeostatic region. And then you get too much vitamin D, and you can get into a toxicity situation. And interestingly, the symptoms of vitamin D toxicity and vitamin D deficiency can be similar. So luckily today we have laboratory tests, and we can measure vitamin D and get people to their optimum levels. And then, a cool thing about plants is that they have all these compounds that act as anti-inflammatories. So here is our connection with nature, again, to help bring us back into homeostasis, because when we have been under the effects of stress, the effects on our adrenal glands, pumping out of cortisol, and I'll go a little bit more deeply into this shortly, eventually leads to a state of being outside that nice homeostatic spot where we are now in a pro-inflammatory state. And so this is just an example of, these are things people often use in food or drinks: ginger tea, ginger chews. You find ginger in Asian food a lot, curcuma longa as the main component in a yellow curry, and a compound in called curcumin that acts upon the same pathway that ibuprofen does, as well as other pathways. This is boswellia. This one's got some specific anti-inflammatory effects for the brain. Cannabis, the compound THC acting on cannabinoid receptors, can turn down the volume on inflammation at low doses. Cannabidiol having anti-inflammatory properties. And then we have all of these colors in food. So everything that's a color in a food is an antioxidant. And polyunsaturated fats. So we have to protect our proteins, and we have to protect the lipids in our body from this oxidative damage and inflammation. And so those healthy fats from avocado and coconut and palm oils and butter, these are all actually helping us quench reactive oxygen species and protect our bodies. So when you have a client with history of trauma, lacking stress resilience, you can be guaranteed that they need anti-inflammatories in their life. So we're going to talk more specifically about how you can be botanically informed, so that when you have clients come to you inquiring about these botanical therapies that are being used in a therapeutic context, that you have the language and understanding to talk to the client about it. It's not intended to prepare you to use this medicine. So these psychedelics, or compounds that we have called entheogens, and this was coined by a group of ethnobotanists in 1979. And an entheogen is a substance substance that is considered to induce an alteration in perception, mood, consciousness, cognition, or behavior. And this is a concept that's been used across almost every culture for thousands of years, whether Hebrew, Greek, African, Vedic. There have always been these plants that societies have turned to and used in various contexts. So I thought it would be good just to access some of the terms that's used around this type of medicine. And in general, we're talking about the ability to access subconscious material. So we've talked a lot about how people aren't aware of that they've even had trauma, or how this trauma is having a big impact on their life. So the first term is psychoactive, and this is a very broad term that just means affecting the mind. A hallucinogen is something that's considered to actually be reality changing. And so this may be something that's changing reality in the moment, but also has the potential to change perception of reality over the long period. Psychedelic, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but in general, thought of it as an expander of consciousness. So Dr. David Nichols has called it as inducing the capacity to reliably induce states of altered perception, thought, and feeling that are not normally experienced otherwise, except maybe in dreams or in times of religious exaltation, or maybe surfing. An empathogen is something that increases our ability to connect, to have empathy, or to have introspection about oneself. Also, it'll produce experiences of increased communion with others around the person, or communion with nature. And an enactogen is, sometimes there's a lot of disagreement about whether these mean the exact same thing or not. But in addition to increasing empathy, we think that there's other neurotransmitters involved when a compound is an enactogen that's a more stimulant property. And then there are drugs that are considered dissociative. So these are now leading more to detachment rather than connection, and also distortions of perception. So these can be compounds that are a little trickier to work with. And we're not going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about these ones here in orange: cannabis, MDMA, psilocybin, and ayahuasca. So these atypical hallucinogens would include ketamine, which is a really popular one, so we're not going to talk about that today. All of these have been known to provoke mystical experiences, and Albert Hoffman is the scientist, who sort of accidentally discovered this when he touched some LSD in his lab. So these entheogens that we're going to talk about are MDMA, psilocybin, and ayahuasca. But I wanted to start with cannabis and cannabinoids because so commonly used now by a lot of people, especially where it's legal for adult use or even medicinal use. So our body, as you already know, has this internal system called the endocannabinoid system. And there's two compounds. The first one discovered was called anandamide, so after the Sanskrit word for bliss. And so these lines all represent where they're joined carbon compounds. These second lines are double bonds, and that just means that this is a flexible fat. This is made from arachidonic acid. So this is a fatty acid we get in our food all of the time. So anandamide and 2-AG are almost identical looking. They both are made from arachidonic acid. They just have a little different tail. So these are part of our endorphins. We know that these compounds can get increased with moderate exercise, with singing, with drumming, using acupuncture. So we can boost our endocannabinoid system. And then there's this whole class of plant compounds that we've called phytocannabinoids that are all based around a similar structure because they all come from the same starting compound. This is the molecule THC that's the most well-known because of its psychoactive effects. So it's kind of got a structure that looks similar to a steroid molecule. And steroids are like our female hormones, estrogen, male hormone, testosterone. Cortisol is steroid hormone. And then it's got this little tail on it. So THC and cannabidiol, here's cannabidiol, they're almost identical, except CBD has this open ring right here. And this is the main molecule that's acting on, or THC is the main molecule acting on our cannabinoid receptors directly and activating those receptors. So giving a similar response to what these endocannabinoids will do. So is cannabis a psychedelic? I have people that come to see me, for education and advice on using cannabis medicinally, and they're often worried about hallucinating. So there have been reports of hallucinations following acute cannabis dosing, but in general, it's just psychoactive and not a hallucinogen. And this is an experience of oceanic boundlessness, ego dissolution, providing an opportunity for emotional breakthrough, enhancing of the senses. So, being out in nature with cannabis use can really enhance the nature experience. But what we have going on today is the most common form that people are using cannabis is a vape pen. So here, this is data from my lab that I used to have in Washington. And so these were 6 different cannabis flower types, and the THC content is about 20%. But once these extracts are made, this cannabinoid or THC content is now increased 4-fold to 60 to 80. I see these products labeled sometimes 90%. So, that's not the plant medicine, because that's not how, or the potency at which the plant delivers these compounds. They're located on the surface of the plant in these trichomes, and then they can be removed through different solvent processes, and then they wind up in these vape pens. And so at these doses, that's really a hard hitter on the endocannabinoid system that actually downregulates the system over time. And the other thing is that as you go up in dose, THC can have off-target effects. So high doses of THC are known to directly bind this serotonin receptor that's called 5-HT2A, and you'll see that that's the target of these hallucinogens or psychedelic compounds. But in general, it's more of an enactogen and an empathogen, maybe a minor hallucinogen, but not true visual or auditory hallucinations. Can be a little bit of a stimulant depending on the dose or the type of cannabis. And it tends to, the system plays with all of the neurotransmitter systems, because remember, it's a homeostatic system and it provides feedback for every tissue and system in our body. And so it's possible to take sub-intoxicating doses. As you go up in dose, people are going to have changes in space and time perception, sometimes flight of ideas, bringing into the present moment. Euphoria is the thing that most people are seeking by using cannabis. and it can be a sedative or a hypnotic. CBD is, you might hear it not being called not psychoactive, but it does have its own psychoactivity, although it's not the same as THC. It's mainly been described as something that could be very calming or an anti-anxiety compound, but this is probably only at very high doses and not usually at the doses that most people are using it. There's bioavailability issues when you get up into these high doses, and there's a lot of different products out there. So it's a good idea to try to get an idea of what, if a patient's using cannabis, take some time and give attention to this to learn more about how they're using it. So it has been used in the therapeutic setting. It's not widely used that way, but there are some people doing this. And so it can either make a person feel relaxed or energized. They can experience dizziness at higher doses or with inhalation. It can cause a dilation of blood vessels that can cause the heart rate to speed up. But they can, the perceptual piece is time passing more slowly, having increased introspection. I think it has the property of increasing interoception, that people are more aware of the body. It can have cause some short-term memory problems, but this wears off as the drug wears off. And opening the potential to travel through their memory in a more relaxed state. So this part of the slide, and we'll have this for each of these compounds that we're going to talk about. With oral ingestion, probably not going to work as well depending on the therapeutic session, because it takes a while and it's more erratic orally and how long it takes to peak in the bloodstream or the come up portion. The plateau can vary again based on individual metabolism of compounds. And then there's a come down phase and sometimes some after effects. With inhaled cannabis, that's a very rapid onset and then reaching a plateau pretty quickly, coming down usually within 2 to 4 hours, and maybe after effects, but this would really be for people that are not accustomed to ever using cannabis before. So we know that the endocannabinoid system is implicated in chronic stress, major depression, PTSD, because we've measured low levels of these endocannabinoids and or the receptors, the protein receptors, CB1 receptors specifically. This is the one most widely expressed in the brain and responsible for the psychoactivity. And we know that in animal models and in some human studies that giving THC or other compounds that bind that CB1 receptor facilitate fear extinction. So this is a problem in trauma that, there's been something that has invoked this traumatic response, an event, and then there are these triggers that put the person right back in that event really quickly. And so this is the brain pathway. The hypothalamus signals to the pituitary, and the pituitary signals down to our adrenal glands to release epinephrine, that's the fast stress hormone, and then cortisol, which is sort of the slower one. And so then once cortisol is released, it's supposed to travel back up to the hypothalamus, and the endocannabinoid system is mediating this conversation and tell the hypothalamus, okay, we got it. You don't have to keep telling us to release cortisol because you don't want cortisol being released all the time. But when adrenaline and cortisol are continually being produced by the adrenal glands, what eventually happens is the cortisol receptor gets downregulated. And this leads to a pro-inflammatory state in the brain and in the body, because cortisol is a major anti-inflammatory in our body. This is why cortisol is supposed to peak first thing in the morning, and this is why fever will be lower in the morning. We should feel our best and most energized in the morning. And this also leads to brain remodeling. So we know that cannabis can have this experience that's been demonstrated in veterans with PTSD, that it helps to, facilitate this fear extinction, to reduce nightmares. What about anxiety? Are people going to get anxiety benefit from cannabis? People who use it say so. They even report, these are surveys showing what percentage of people are substituting anti-anxiety medications with cannabis. So it's one of the top reasons people may report using cannabis for depression and anxiety, but these are actually the most understudied areas of cannabis therapy. And in fact, cannabis use can be associated with mood disorders. So does cannabis reduce depression? There are some randomized controlled trials, but they're inconclusive. This use of high potency cannabis, especially at earlier ages, is definitely linked to depression. So if you have a patient or a client that's using cannabis and is depressed, don't rule out that cannabis could be an underlying cause of depression, especially that high dose or high potency cannabis product. Does it reduce anxiety? It may depend on the dose, because there are these biphasic effects where low dose of THC can reduce anxiety, but higher dose is going to increase anxiety. What about causing psychosis or schizophrenia? There are definitely associations that have been made in the literature. And this is most commonly seen in first episode psychosis during adolescence. So what about using cannabis as a psycholytic therapy? There's been a case report. The research is really sparse. And so there have been effects such as dehabituation, which is where when a reaction toward a known stimulus is actually enhanced. So this is why, training around these things are important, because you're never quite sure exactly how any given patient is going to respond to cannabis or any of the other psychedelics. And this is why being a therapist using these tools is now considered spiritual midwifery, coming back to where I started as a literal midwife, and studying spiritual midwifery, that this process of taking people through journeys with plants is a form of spiritual midwifery. And just briefly, there's a lot of talk out there about prenatal THC exposure. I just say no. There's a lot of emerging data on the endocannabinoid system in a first hit model that this early prenatal THC exposure is predisposing this human being being formed in the womb, affecting their brain development. And maybe in animal models, Yasmin Hurd has showed that it leads to enhanced dopamine functioning in animals. And so this could be affecting learning as a child, their vulnerability for psychiatric disorders, and the processing of reward by the brain. So the best drug in pregnancy is no drug. All right, so we're going to now talk about the psychedelics themselves. And the term mind revealing is what the literal meaning of psychedelic is. So we know that people with depression, anxiety, PTSD have negative and abnormal thought patterns. And these patterns have been associated with brain networks. So I talked about networks early on, and we're going to talk more about these networks now, because this functional connectivity between these brain networks determines mood, behaviors, our mental health. And we know that early life adversity, depression, these are associated with something called our resting state functional connectivity. So this has been called the default mode network. So this is just a picture of the brain showing you the areas of the brain that can be lit up using functional MRI, which is a form of magnetic resonance imaging that uses, like looking at calcium in the brain or oxygen or glucose utilization in the brain, that can say, oh, this brain area is active. So when we're in our default mode, that's usually like just like the daydreaming state. We're not doing anything that, you know, requires a lot of executive function, planning. We're just at rest. Our brain should be resting and dreaming. The salience network is connected to that, what we would think of as the limbic system, our feelings. So deeper parts of the brain, which is also where the endocannabinoid system is highly expressed. And the salience network is really in charge of helping us go from default mode to this executive function. So these are the three networks: salience, default, and executive. And so what can happen in depression is a hyper focusing on the self. So even when in default mode, there's this negative thought pattern going on in the brain. So it's like the connectivity and this network is kind of stuck here. This is this introspective mode, default mode, but now the introspection is being warped by these past experiences, and these brain networks sort of getting stuck. All right, we'll come back to that again, because we're going to talk about you know, how we can get these brain networks unstuck. And surfing is one way to do that, because it puts us into that flow. And flow is when, you know, we're more in the default mode and we've turned off that salience piece that's the negative self-talk. And that this has been imaged. We know this is actually happening in the brain. So going back to foods, we have a amino acid that we can get from many foods: greens, grains, nuts. Probably the most popular or famous one is from turkey. And so our body converts tryptophan to serotonin, which is also called 5-HTP. And then that serotonin also can be transformed into melatonin. So tryptophan is an essential nutrient that we need in our diet, because this serotonergic system is active across tissues in our body, not just in our brain. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. And interestingly, you know, our medical system has been built on treating this system by giving SSRIs as an antidepressant. But there's new data that's challenging this serotonin theory of depression. But 80% believe depression is caused by this single neurotransmitter disorder. So there's a bunch of different subtypes of serotonin receptor. The most serotonin is actually made in our gut. We know that it has been associated, this receptor that we're going to talk about, the 5-H2A receptor, has been associated with suicidal behaviors, mood disorders, depression and stress, and then individual genetic variations that people can have in these receptor signaling systems that may predispose them to having mental health disorders. So tryptamines are, let's look at, you can see serotonin, these N's are nitrogens, and they're called amines in chemistry. So these compounds are called tryptamines, and our body in its metabolism makes tryptamines normally, so made in the gut, made in neurons, We use tryptamines to treat migraine. We know that they do all of these things. An important one is triggering plasticity in our brain. So that's our brain's ability to make new connections. And that's what we probably all need, but especially these clients that we're working with. So these are what are acting as hallucinogens. They can provide profound subjective experiences, but keep in mind, these profound subjective experiences typically only occur in about 1% of people, if they get one dose of these compounds. So, it's a more extensive process of using this medicine to work with clients than just, oh, I'm going to go out and do some mushrooms. But it's a great catalyst for therapy because people typically have profound experiences. So first we'll talk about psilocybe. So this is a genus of mushrooms. And psilocybe cubensis is the primary one that's being used in this research. So psilocybe is the name of the mushroom. The compound that the mushroom makes is called psilocybin, but our body has to metabolize it into psilocin, and this is now the active compound. So it's mainly impacting the serotonin system. I think of it as it's just kind of a busy bee. It'll induce visual hallucinations like seeing patterns. It's going to stimulate imagination in addition to altering the sense of time and space, even size. Can induce like a wandering mind, a dreamlike quality. And, here's what seemed, I used to have this cartoon that said cannabis over here, and now today it says psilocybin because this is a huge buzzword. I'm amazed. I work in a UCSD system. I'm amazed at how many people bring it up. So, there are some side effects. People can get very dizzy, feel weak, get some tremor, nausea, distortions that can feel scary. So not everybody's a great candidate. I was speaking with a therapist who does this work, and she said the more control that people want to have, and this is something that people with high anxiety and past trauma, they really like control of the environment. They want to know everything. They want to explain and understand. They're more difficult to work with, and often one dose or one session isn't enough for these people. So I think having realistic expectations is important. So this is an oral ingestion. Again, it takes a while for it to come up. There's a plateau period, and then there's a come down period. And there can be after effects, but not necessarily for all people. So, patients have to be off of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There's other drugs they should not be on. So, it's not for just anyone. They probably need to be having some medical advice as well. Psilocybe contains about 1% of psilocybin. Like if you took a whole mushroom, 1% of that. So there's a lot going on about microdosing. It's a growing trend. These are non-hallucinogenic doses. I haven't seen anybody do this yet and really have a strong effect on depression. But, some people feel a little bit better, but, it's not a quick fix. Again, treating the whole person, I think, is really important. It's being used in a method called stacking with niacin and lion's mane. Lion's mane also has some compounds that induce this brain plasticity, or these are neuron outgrowths that increase connectivity in the brain. So the next one I was going to talk about is MDMA. So this is being used for severe PTSD. This is the recent study that's been published by the MAPS Association. 60 to 40% don't respond to first-line therapeutics. We know that dropout is high for psychotherapy. So here's something else coming back into play. This was first a compound that was synthesized, I think back in the 1920s by a German pharmacist. And then this gentleman, Sasha Shulgin, and his wife, Anne, started resynthesizing this compound and synthesizing others and trying them out. So it's a little bit different from the psilocybin molecule in that it's also an enactogen. It's hitting some other targets that cause it to be more stimulating. It can have some negative side effects. So this jaw clenching that can be really uncomfortable, flushing, feeling very hot, sweating. But in general, a wonderful feeling of euphoria and this wanting to have this increased connection with people and feeling empathy. It can be a great introductory medicine before psilocybin, especially for those people that really want a lot of control. So time period can be a little bit shorter than the psilocybin. It's often given at a small dose and then a top off 1 to 2 hours later. There's a plateau phase, and then the patient will start to come down, and that's usually when they're ready to go home. And then, these patients are having visits with the therapist before and after these experiences to integrate everything. This is ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is a tea blend made from 2 plants that come from South America. The main compound is dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. So they brew these plants by boiling them. This one is necessary, Banisteriopsis cappyi, because it has compounds that are keeping our gut from metabolizing the DMT so that the DMT can be effective. And this has always been used ritually in South American cultures. There's a lot of preparatory work that goes into an ayahuasca experience. It is a psychedelic, it's an enactogen, not so much an empathogen. It's acting on numerous neurotransmitters at various receptors, and it provides, again, this shift in perception. People may have these experiences of a relationship with a higher being. And so this is a longer experience. They've often been done at night. I think they're starting to do ayahuasca experiences now, the ritual leaders that are happening during the daytime. So there can be bad trips. Can they cause psychosis? Not usually, but there have been reports of this. There's this experience of flashbacks, of these perceptual experiences that can occur later. So, it's not anything to play with or mess with, outside of the context of understanding who the person is, and, how everything that goes into who they are could affect their experience. So this is why, working with somebody who's trained in it is really important for therapeutic purposes, and we'll give you resources for that. So these are people who probably aren't good candidates, and there's other drugs and things that people should probably not be on if they're going to consider this experience. And just to close, the set and the setting are really important. And, preparing the person, preparing the space, having them feel in a safe environment, and putting a lot of thought into the whole experience as a ritual is of really prime importance. So we have this, Tracy had mentioned the fungus, which is this underground network that's everywhere under our feet, of this mycelium that we can't even see, and they're connecting between plants. And if you think of our neurons, it even looks very similar. And so how fascinating that this connection back to this earth structure of mycelium as an opportunity to heal the brain is really coming into the forefront of our medicine. So here's some references. We'll make these all available to you, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Michelle. We have some time for some questions and answering. So go on. Tell us what you want to know. Or what you got out of that. Like, what are you feeling right now?
I have a thought. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go.
Oh, well, it's just a thought. It's not I think anything too profound. But earlier in the talk, there was a lot of mention about group therapy, our group dynamics, group trauma healing. And I just find that it's curious that so much of the psilocybin and I guess entheogenic studies are done on an individual basis with an assistance of a therapist. I would think that there might be some group dynamics that might also be particularly helpful, especially after the therapeutic session. So anyway, just that's a thought. And if y'all are going to be thought leaders in the field, because it is emerging, just some ideas for potential future resources or things to think about as studies are being designed. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Jake, because, ayahuasca and in that culture has always been a group ceremony, and so how we're separating this out now and removing people from their support systems is kind of interesting. I got to participate in an MDMA session in which it was a couple and myself and the therapist, and we had a connection with each other. And she said it was the first time she had ever done it, with family there. And she was just astounded at the difference between how it went when it was just she and the individual versus having the context of that social support. She said, I think I may start doing this all the time. So, even if it's not a group of people who aren't connected, yeah, and a lot of people are scared of this experience. So why not have somebody there? And in this context, the person having the MDMA experience kept having questions. And, if I hadn't been there to respond to some of these questions, she probably wouldn't have had the same experience with the medicine.
Curious, and I did not know that about the traditional ceremonies. So thank you.
Yeah,
And even
community
that
is
piece
huge.
of
Community is huge, and it's something we are lacking right now. And so really any experience of connection with others is uplifting in a time of isolation.
yeah, and traditionally all of it was done within community and also within nature. And so I think that's a big piece within as we start having these practices integrated into the therapy model, is also having it integrated into the therapy office box and seeing is that it's different. And it doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong, it's just different. And you'll receive different things in different spaces, whether you're doing it individually or with community or out in nature or within the confines of an office. And I think it's kind of meeting people where they're at. Some people are ready to do it within community, within nature. And I love that Dr. Michelle was speaking into different people, because of their trauma experiences, need to feel like there's more control in the space. And so doing it within community or within nature can spark that feeling of oh, I don't have control over the other people there. I don't have control over the nature around me. And so having it in a very controlled space can help start that feeling of safety. And then as they feel more and more safe, being able to welcome in and integrate in nature and community into that. But it takes, everyone's in different spaces with what they're ready for.
I meant to speak to this when you were talking about safety. And people with chronic illness and chronic pain, we lack safety of body. And that's a pretty primal thing. If you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy, if you know what that is, that's at the bottom. When you're just fighting every day to get out of the house or do anything, these experiences could really help to bridge that gap. the community is very important, and illness is invisible, and many people are not believed, and there's a lot of sickness, long COVID, which is actually an inflammatory disease, and people are having heart issues, and there's like a huge amount of people that are developing a condition where you stand up too fast and you fall down, called POTS. It's starting to happen everywhere. And so the research, I'm really happy about that, because most times female issues don't get researched. So if this affects men, then maybe we'll get something for these younger women that I see that are in their 30s and suffering and looking for these experiences. And how safe is it if they're not well? You know, who is a candidate? Yeah, that's a lot of questions.
What Groundswell is doing, because you know what, when I think about surfing, I know for me, I have to feel a sense of physical courage to want to go surf. Like there's just some days where for some reason I'm not feeling it, you know? And then there's other days it's like, I'm going to go out there and rip it, you know? And so, yeah, we have these fluctuation. I'm sure female hormones affect it, male hormones affect it. Everything coming in affects how we're feeling in our body at any given time. But to be able to go out in the ocean and, you know, have a buddy there with you, it builds on that sense of physical courage. And then to take that physical courage back into your everyday life is really empowering, I think.
Yeah. And having the group and planning the event will help the person feel safe. And that's the most important part of any of these root processes.
So Soleil here. Sorry, I'm sick with COVID right now, so I'm not coming off. But thank you. What I think I appreciated hearing along with the community pieces, because I've been playing with doing more groups myself. I think I'm personally missing that. And but what I think what I was getting from this is the groundedness with which you all speak to the work that you do. I've gone and done some ketamine sessions at different places, and I've noticed that the languaging around it has gotten very spiritually based and rather woo-woo. And it was off-putting in that it was not allowing me to have my experience in the way that I needed to have that, because it seemed to place this essence of you know, of the 1960s, kind of where the psychedelics came in. And I think we're going to limit ourselves if we continue to sort of along the woo-woo land. It's not that some people don't need that, but without opening the language up and being real with what's actually happening, which I feel you all were very good about doing, like real language, real experience, you know, I think that's going to ground this work in a way that will be able to be captured by more people rather than winnow out those who say, oh, that's whatever that is. So sorry, my brain's a little bit off, so I hope you got all that.
Well, ketamine in particular has 2 free methods, and one of them is an infusion. And so people who are sick and hoping to look for pain relief and anxiety relief may be more comfortable in that situation of having someone in there and having an infusion, while others are, woo-woo, as you say. There's a gap there, of course, and we, PTI, that's our bridge. Our bridge is, hey, let's look at the medical. Hey, ketamine has been shown to limit pain as a rapid antidepressant, bringing that back to what the person is experiencing medically, And if they can do that in a natural setting, which you can. So there's a lot of different ideas that we have to do these groups with someone like Michelle, who has experience and makes you feel safe, because she knows so much. And we're playing around with where and when. And the psychedelics are not legal yet, so I'm not really sure how that will work. But at this point, ketamine can be a group session because it's tablets, and psychedelics are not criminal, but maybe I'm not sure. Well, honestly, I'm not sure about that part yet.
Yeah, it seems like that for the psychedelic experience, that's such a deep interpersonal one that can really require the need for that one-on-one attention from the therapist. That having to support people there rather than multiple people, having the psychedelic experience at once kind of recreates the group or the community feeling, but focused on, one individual. So how powerful is that, to have that loving energy coming in for you from people around you that you know and trust. Yeah, the ayahuasca, it's a bit, I didn't have time to say it, but it's a pretty popular one. People are going to Peru to do it. The thing about it is that it causes a pretty severe purging for most people. So I've done an ayahuasca ceremony, and the first night was just horrendous because all I did was vomit and have diarrhea several times. And that's when we got up the next day, I said, yeah, I'm not going to do it again. Why would I want to do that again? And, really the whole group was just really nice. And they said, oh yeah, just go take some time off, go to the beach, you don't have to do it. There was no pressure. And by the end of the day, I decided I would do it again, the second ceremony, the second night. And I got one of the fellow partakers came and told me to use my breath and instructed me on a little deep breathing. And I didn't get sick at all the second night. But that could be off-putting, for some people. I mean, why do that if you don't have to? It's probably part of the medicine and could be important for some people, but not as desirable for others.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love where we're going with this and really bringing in our own personal experiences. And so I'm aware of our time, so I'm going to start wrapping us in and hoping that this is like the beginning of many conversations. And so as we start wrapping out, taking a moment to reconnect in with your own experience of your own connection with nature. It's something that we did the very moment that we came out of the womb, is starting to connect in with our senses and connecting with nature. Before therapists told us that this was healthy for us and good for our mind, before the science was doing all the research, our bodies knew that nature, community, connection is something that we deeply need. And now luckily we have the science and the research to back that up and to remind us, like, yes, I deeply know this, and now I also know it in multiple ways. And so if you still have that piece of nature in front of you, maybe taking a moment to connect in with it, noticing, like, where'd my little piece go? I'll take another piece of it. Noticing once again, its textures, the different colors, the ways the colors maybe interact. If there's parts that are holding lots of light or shadow. Maybe there's a smell. Maybe the smell has changed. Noticing the temperature of it. Maybe the taste of it. And so today we spent the last 3 hours skimming just the surface of how nature heals us, from plants to surfing, and all in between. And so taking a moment to connect in with what does this piece of nature have to teach you about yourself, about your relationship to yourself, your relationship to others, and your relationship to this earth. And I'm going to read the words from Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And so knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate it. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. As we work to heal the earth heals us. And as we work to heal ourselves, we're also healing the earth. And so let us go and be in, on, under, surrounded by, play with nature and see what she has to teach us, to reveal to us, to remind us, to remember within us and around us. And as we find our healing in her, let us also do our part to heal her. Because as we heal ourselves, we're also healing our communities and we're also healing nature. And so maybe let's wrap out with just typing in the chat one thing that you're holding on to or taking away from today that you want to continue being curious around, explore, experience, and welcome into your own practice with nature. And we'll end there. Read them as they come in. Wonder, community, interconnectedness, grace and gratitude, connection and something to something larger, flow. So just as we began, let's do 3 breaths, welcoming exactly what is within us and around us into us right now. So feeling once again how this space is supporting you. Maybe feeling your back body connected to the space behind you. And we'll inhale in. Feeling the temperature of the air as it comes into our nostrils, and then exhale. Feeling the temperature change as it comes back out. Inhaling in, welcoming your shoulders up towards your ears, feeling the space within you grow. Everything you need is already within you. Then exhaling, feeling your shoulders drop down, gravity. And then final inhale, allowing your body to take up space, stretching beyond the Zoom screen. And then exhaling, welcoming it down and around, ending in that little squeeze, that ability to touch. And thank y'all for being here, for diving in, for being curious, and for seeing what's possible as we really all show up in this work and get to practice it within our own personal lives, and then also holding that space for others. And so Shane followed up saying, thank you. We'll send a follow-up email with the link to the CEUs and quiz, and the link to the recording and PDF slides. So you'll have all the notes, all the goodies that you'll be able to access through the email, and then also through the Mighty Networks classroom platform. I know logistic-wise, the Pain Trauma Institute is having a surf therapy program this Sunday for specifically welcoming in medical practitioners, physical therapists, OTs, to be able to experience it themselves. So that way you can more powerfully recommend and refer clients to future programs. Any other pieces, Tracy, that you wanted to?
Well, I
make sure
just
people have
heard
access to?
from Dr. Cooch, Jason, that he's coming down with team members to whatever, some kind of brain machine that he's going to measure. That's all I know. And it's going to measure pre and post surfing. And that's what he's going to be doing. He's really knowledgeable about the neuroscience, and specifically that the reproductive system is our most important system because we're meant to procreate. And we have a lot of attention towards it. And it's hard not, if you're having it, to think about anything else. Your world can get very small.
Yeah, beautiful. So Shane just put the link in for the event or the surf therapy program on Sunday. So feel free to click that if you're interested, come join. And even if you're just curious of like, ooh, I wonder what this is, come and experience it. Experiencing it is a great way of knowing it. Okay. Well, thank y'all for coming and being a part of this. And maybe we'll see you out in, on, and around nature sometime soon.
Okay. So stop.